anything that is valuable comes with certain obligations that it imposes on the person who actually has or possesses it. Anything that is of value comes with obligations to anyone who possesses that thing of value. So if you are a person of value, you are what I would call a value creator. And that is a person who has something in themselves that could be beneficial to something or someone else, right? Whether it's a knowledge, whether it's a skill, whether it's an experience, whether it's an understanding of something, whether it's a background, whatever, something that can be beneficial to something or someone else, in that it meets a need or it meets a want, right? Or a desire, right? It meets a want, a need, or a desire. So you've got a knowledge in something, and that knowledge is able to help someone else solve their problem. You've got a skill or a talent that is able to cheer someone up, to brighten their day, to benefit their mood, to enlighten them in some way, some form or fashion. You are what I would call a person of value. And if we dig deep into ourselves and reflect, we'll see that there are certain things that, God has put in us which are of value and can benefit someone else, either by serving a want or serving a need. Some of these are innate. We're born with them. You're born with a natural talent to sing, a natural ability to, do X, Y, and Z. Some of them are cultivated over time and are developed, whether it's through education, through experience, through knowledge, through, various ways in which we accumulate things that we're naturally born with, but which we cultivate and strengthen. And the blend of these things, the things that are natural, innate, and the things that we've cultivated over time, they blend together to help us each individually have a unique value that we can offer to something or someone else. I'd like to propose that each of those aspects about us that make us valuable beings and potentially beneficial to someone else have obligations that impose on them. And there are 3 obligations. The first, which I've spoken about in times before, is the obligation to give that value, right? That if you have something of benefit or something of value, its truest value comes in its distribution, in it being shared, right? In it being taken out of you to the person who it is deemed to benefit or deemed to satisfy or value. So that's the first obligation of value. It's the obligation to give it. The second obligation, and the third, which I'll maybe discuss in another video, the second obligation is the obligation to scale. The obligation to scale. And the third obligation is the obligation to, how can I put it, to promote or, evangelize or to distribute the knowledge of that value that you have to give. And I only speak about one of those now. I'll speak about the other one in another time. The obligation to scale. The obligation to scale is understanding that the things that you have that could be of benefit to someone else could be of benefit to many people, right? To more than one person. And the idea of scaling is the idea of leveraging various things that you can to give that value as much as you can, right? To give more of that value as you can, or as much as you can, to leverage any tools, any media, any, things that you can to make sure that you give more of that value to more and more people. So what do I mean by leverage? If you are trying to dig a hole, for example, the speed and the scale at which you can dig that hole will be informed by the tools you use to try and dig that hole. So if I'm using a spoon to try and dig a hole, I won't get as far as if I'm using a shovel or a spade. And if I use a shovel or a spade, I won't get as far as if I'm using a tractor or a TLB, right? If I'm using a digger, those electric diggers. So the tools enable one to have greater leverage in the task of digging a hole, right? So tools add leverage. And ultimately, that's what all tools are created to do. Tools are force multipliers. They are there to enable you and I to maximize the outputs of our inputs, right? So that if you have one input, it can have 10x outputs. So if you take one spoon, you can dig out a certain amount of dirt from the ground. Whereas if you have a shovel, you might use the same amount of time, but you'll have maximal outputs. And if you use a tractor and so on. So tools allow one to leverage or to maximize on the outputs based on the inputs that they might have, whether it's time or effort or resources. So when it comes to this idea of giving value, when I talk about scale, I mean leveraging is whatever tools possible to scale or to give more value than one can possibly do with lesser tools. Now, maybe it must be important for me to explain what I mean by scale. I've discussed leverage, but scale is the idea of one of two things: to either maximize or multiply the value that you have to give. Maximize or multiply. Now, to explain what each of those means, to maximize means to increase the intensity of something, right? So if you have a drink that you're drinking, whether you're drinking a concentrate or a cordial or whatever, if you're drinking Oros or whatever cordial that you might desire, the more cordial you add to it in relation to water, the more intense it becomes, right? And that's the idea of increasing its intensity or increasing in its quality, right? To magnify the value that you have to give. And it might be, if you've got a certain, information that you're sharing or whatever, is to increase the quality of that thing so that you give more and more value, right? To increase it in quality. Now, I'm speaking in generic terms, but I want you to think about whatever specific thing you might have in mind when it comes to the value you can give and relate it to that. So I might use various examples, but think of it in relation to the specific area of value that you can give that can benefit to someone else. So it's the area of maximizing the value. That's what I mean by scale. Maximizing the value in the sense of increasing the intensity, increasing the quality, increasing the degree of value that a specific singular item can give. So if you have one book and you load that with more value and more practical tips, more analogies, it increases the value or the quality of that book. So it increases the intensity, it maximizes. And as a result, you can then charge more for it. I'll get back to that point. The second aspect of scaling is multiplying, to say that I can do one of these things, but I need to find a way to do 10 of these things so that 10 more people can benefit from it. There's a lady I know who, she's great at baking cakes. And in as much as she's great at baking cakes, the ability to bake one cake is one way. But the moment she's able to extract the recipe for that cake and then to teach other people to make the same cake, she's then able to multiply the output of the cake based on the same recipe, the same input, right? And then more and more people can benefit from the value. So the second aspect of leverage or of scaling is the area of multiplying. So there's maximizing and then there's multiplying. And that's scaling. Why do I call this an obligation of value? If what you have is truly valuable to give, we rob the world, I've said before, of not giving them that value, right? And if someone can benefit from that value, they suffer a loss if they don't receive that value that you have to give. And so leveraging or scaling is a way to ensure that more and more and more people get to receive the value that you and I have to give, to maximize and to multiply on the value that you have to give. Now, maybe I could use the example of certain knowledge, certain information, certain stories, certain background, certain information that you have to give that can be of benefit to someone else. For example, there's a problem you might have solved for yourself, which you know how to solve for other people, or which you have learned how to solve for other people. Even if you might not have faced the problem yourself, but you might have learned and studied on how to solve that problem for other people. That knowledge is value. That knowledge ought to be given to someone else so that they can benefit from it. Now, if more and more people are to benefit from it, then you are to scale that value so that more and more people can benefit from it. Now, that may be using various tools, using social media to gain more followers, using, creating a digital product, creating an ebook, etc. But the aim is to leverage and scale the knowledge and the information that you have so that more and more people can benefit from it. And this can be beyond knowledge, but value, right? The value. I'll end it off on this point, and then I'll discuss the second obligation of value, or the third obligation of value in another video. There is an obligation that comes with having something valuable to give. And the first obligation is to give it. The second obligation is to scale on the value that you have to give by leveraging various tools. That's to maximize on the value, right, increasing its quality, and to multiply on the value. That's to multiply the amount of, units that value is contained in. The benefit in all of this is that if enough people find value out of it, they can appreciate the value through return of either money or time or attention or effort. They can appreciate the value that you have to give. And the more you can leverage on that value, right, the more you can scale on that value, is the greater the appreciation can be in return, right? Whether it's in monetary means, whether it's in support, etc. There is an obligation that comes with value. And that obligation, when it is fulfilled, always benefits the giver of that value, such that it can be truly said that it is indeed more blessed to give than to receive. And if there's a blessing in giving, then why not give as much value as you possibly can to as many people as you possibly can, both in quality, right, maximizing intensity, and in multiplication, right, in the volume of value that you can give. All this may be an inspiration and a challenge to each of us to realize the value that we have to give and to be creative on ways in which to multiply that value. If you've got maybe something of value that you think you are able to give, maybe share a comment and leave a note in below so we can actually see what value you can give and what possible leverage there is for that. Otherwise, wish you all the best and looking forward to catching each other on the other side. All the best.